The Valori Collective had conquered 4,000 worlds across the galaxy, and they had never once failed in their mission of domination. Senior researcher Thylix stood before the observation window of the research vessel and watched the stars drift past like scattered diamonds against the endless black void of space. Her four eyes blinking in a slow rhythm that showed her complete confidence in what was about to happen. For 12,000 years, her species had perfected the art of conquest. But they did not use weapons or armies or the brutal methods of lesser civilizations. No, they used something far more elegant and far more devastating. They used knowledge. Every species in the galaxy had a brain, and every brain had weaknesses. And the Valori had learned long ago that finding those weaknesses was the key to controlling any civilization they encountered. Fear centers, trauma responses, breaking points, the deep primitive instincts that drove survival. All of these things could be mapped and measured and exploited. And once you knew exactly what made a species afraid, once you understood exactly where their psychological armor was thinnest, conquest became as simple as pressing a button. The Valori would study a new species, create perfect propaganda, design ideal threats, and within a generation, that species would surrender without a single shot being fired. It was efficient, it was elegant, and it had never failed. Today, they had captured a new specimen from a species they had been monitoring for several decades. A species called humans from a small blue planet on the far edge of the Orion Arm. The creature had been aboard a simple cargo vessel, just a lone engineer making routine deliveries between the 12 star systems that humanity had managed to colonize in their short time among the stars. Her name, according to the vessel's records, was Elena Vasquez, and she was currently sedated and floating in the neural cradle at the center of Thylix's laboratory. Thylix turned from the window and walked toward the cradle, her 6 legs moving in the smooth gliding motion that her species had evolved over millions of years. Her bioluminescent skin glowing a soft blue that indicated her calm and focused state of mind. The human looked so small and fragile lying there in the cradle, her soft skin and delicate bones nothing compared to the armored bodies of the Valori. A single pair of eyes closed in chemically induced sleep, her strange fur-like hair spreading across the cushioned surface beneath her head. Junior researcher Mox stood beside the control console, his young body trembling slightly with the excitement that came from being part of such an important project. Senior researcher, the neural mapping systems are fully calibrated and ready for activation, he announced, his voice carrying the high pitch of youth and enthusiasm. Thylix nodded her large head slowly and examined the readouts on the display screens that surrounded the cradle. This species is young, she observed, her translator converting her clicks and whistles into words that the recording systems could archive. They have only been traveling between stars for approximately 200 of their years, and their technology is primitive compared to most species we have encountered. Should we expect any difficulties with the mapping process? Mox asked. None whatsoever, Thylix replied with absolute certainty. Their brains are small and relatively simple. Evolved on a planet that our surveys classify as a Category 7 death world, which means they likely developed strong survival instincts, but nothing that should present any challenges to our systems. She reached out with one of her upper manipulator arms and activated the primary scanning array. The neural cradle hummed to life, and thin beams of light began tracing patterns across the human skull, penetrating bone and tissue to read the electromagnetic patterns of the brain beneath. Data began flowing across the screens, columns of numbers and colorful visual representations that showed the structure of the human mind being slowly revealed. Thylix watched with the patient attention of a scientist who had performed this procedure thousands of times before, expecting to see the familiar patterns that every species displayed. The fear centers that govern survival, the pleasure centers that drove reproduction, the social bonding mechanisms that created communities, the hierarchical instincts that established leaders and followers. For the first several minutes, everything appeared normal. The human brain was indeed relatively small, and its structure showed the expected signs of evolutionary development on a hostile world. Strong threat detection systems, robust stress responses, the typical architecture of a species that had survived by being alert and adaptable. But then the deep scan reached the higher cognitive functions, and Tylix felt her secondary hearts begin to beat faster. "Mox, are you seeing this?" she asked, her bioluminescent skin flickering with colors that indicated confusion and growing concern. The junior researcher leaned closer to his screen, his eyes widening as he processed what the data was showing. "I see it, senior researcher, but I do not understand it," he admitted. "The cognitive architecture appears to be fragmented, almost as if there are multiple separate systems operating independently within a single brain." Tylix moved to another console and began running verification protocols, certain that there must be some error in the equipment, some malfunction that was producing these impossible readings. But the verification came back clean. The data was accurate. The human brain was not a single unified system like every other species the Valori had ever studied. Instead, it appeared to be divided into distinct compartments, separate regions that could hold completely different and even contradictory information without any apparent conflict. "How is this possible?" Mox whispered, his skin turning pale with the first hints of fear. "A mind structured like this should collapse under its own contradictions. It should not be able to function at all." Tylix did not answer because she did not have an answer to give. In all her centuries of research, in all the thousands of species she had mapped and studied and helped to conquer, she had never seen anything like this. She instructed the system to go deeper, to probe further into the strange architecture of the human mind, to find the explanation for this impossible structure. And as the scan penetrated into the deepest layers of Elena Vasquez's brain, Tylix saw something that made her blood run cold. There was a door. Not a physical door, but a mental one. A partition that separated one part of the human mind from the rest. A barrier that had been deliberately constructed by evolution itself to keep something locked away. And behind that door, something was waiting. Tylix looked at Mox, and Mox looked at Tylix. And for the first time in their lives, both Valori researchers felt the unfamiliar sensation of genuine terror creeping through their bodies. What had they found? What were humans hiding inside their own minds? And should they dare to open that door and find out? 3 days had passed since the initial scan of the human specimen, and the research vessel had become a place of whispered conversations and nervous glances. Senior researcher Tylix had not slept in all that time, her 4 eyes bloodshot and her bioluminescent skin flickering with unstable colors that betrayed her inner turmoil. And she had called in every expert she could reach through the long-range communication arrays. 12 of the collective's most respected neuroscientists now stood in her laboratory, their combined experience spanning more than 40,000 years of research across hundreds of conquered worlds. And every single one of them was staring at the display screens with expressions of complete disbelief. "Run the scan again," demanded senior academic Varth, the oldest and most accomplished researcher in the entire collective. "There must be an error somewhere in the data, because what you are showing us is simply not possible." Tylix had already run the scan 17 times, and each time the results had been exactly the same. But she activated the sequence once more to satisfy the old academic's demand. The neural cradle hummed, the lights danced across the sleeping human skull, and the data flowed across the screens in rivers of impossible information. "You see?" Tylix said, her voice tired and strained. "The same results every time. The human mind is not unified. It is divided into separate compartments that can operate independently of each other. Academic Vorath leaned closer to the display, his aged body trembling slightly as he processed what he was seeing. "Show me the emotional mapping," he commanded. Thylix adjusted the display to highlight the emotional centers of the human brain, and the assembled scientists let out a collective gasp of shock. The human could feel love and hatred at the same time, not alternating between them as normal species did, but holding both emotions simultaneously in separate chambers of her mind. She could experience hope and despair together, joy and sorrow existing side by side, fear and courage battling within her without either one winning complete control. "This is madness," whispered one of the younger scientists. "Architectural madness of the highest order. How do they not tear themselves apart from the inside?" "Look at this," Mox called from his station. "I have been analyzing the memory structures, and they are even stranger than the emotional systems." The display shifted to show how the humans stored memories, and the scientists gathered around Mox's console with growing horror. Humans could hold traumatic memories in locked chambers, while the rest of their mind continued to function normally. They could know something was true and believe something contradictory at the same time. They could remember pain so intense it should have broken them forever, and yet they could seal that pain away and continue living their lives as if nothing had happened. "They are insane," Academic Vorath declared. "This species is collectively and individually insane by any reasonable definition of the term. Their minds should not work. They should collapse into dysfunction within years of development." "And yet they do not collapse," Thylix observed quietly. "They have built civilizations, created art, developed technology, expanded to multiple star systems, all while carrying this impossible architecture inside their skulls." She walked to the neural cradle and looked down at the sleeping human. This small and fragile creature that had suddenly become the most terrifying thing she had ever encountered. "There is more," she said, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We found something else during the deep scan. Something that I did not include in my initial report because I wanted to verify it with my own eyes before sharing it." She activated a new display sequence, and the screen showed a three-dimensional map of the human brain with one section highlighted in pulsing red. "What is that?" Vorath asked, pointing at the highlighted area with a trembling manipulator. "A door," Thylix answered. "A mental partition that exists in the deepest layers of the human cognitive architecture. A barrier that separates the rest of the mind from something that lies beneath." "Every species has mental barriers," another scientist said dismissively. "They are simply evolutionary safeguards that prevent certain behaviors or thoughts." "Not like this," Thylix replied. "I have never seen a barrier this strong, this deliberately constructed, this obviously designed to keep something contained." She pulled up comparative data from other species they had studied over the millennia. "Look at these other species. Their mental barriers are simple walls that prevent unwanted thoughts from reaching consciousness. But this human barrier is different. It is not just a wall. It is a vault, a prison, a containment system built to hold something dangerous." Academic Vorath studied the data for a long time, his old mind working through the implications of what he was seeing. "Have you attempted to see what lies beyond this barrier?" he finally asked. "No," Thylix admitted. "I was waiting for guidance from the collective's leadership before taking such a drastic step." Vorath turned to face the other scientists, and his expression was grave. "We must know what is behind that door," he declared. "The collective has based its entire strategy of conquest on understanding the minds of other species. And if we cannot understand humans, we cannot predict them. And if we cannot predict them, we cannot control them. What if opening that door damages the specimen?" Mox asked nervously. "Then we will capture more specimens," Vorath replied coldly. "We have the location of their homeworld and their colonies. Obtaining additional humans will not be difficult." Thylix felt a chill run through her body the casual way the old academic spoke of capturing and potentially destroying sentient beings. But she said nothing because she knew he was right. They needed to know what humanity was hiding. "Very well," she said, moving to the control console. "I will begin the deep penetration sequence now." The other scientists gathered around the displays, their faces showing a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing dread. Thylix activated the sequence, and the neural cradle systems began the delicate process of penetrating the mental barrier that protected whatever secret the human mind contained. For several minutes, nothing happened, and some of the scientists began to relax, thinking perhaps the barrier was simply an evolutionary remnant with nothing of importance behind it. But then the data began to flow, and the screens lit up with information from beyond the door. And one by one, every scientist in that laboratory felt their blood turn to ice. Academic Vorath stumbled backward, his old legs nearly failing him. Mox made a sound that was half scream and half whimper. And Thylix simply stood there, frozen in place, her four eyes fixed on the display that showed her exactly what humanity had locked away inside their own minds. Now she understood why humans feared themselves. Now she understood everything. And that understanding was the most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. The laboratory had fallen completely silent, except for the soft hum of the neural scanning equipment and the rapid breathing of terrified scientists. Thylix could not look away from the display screen, even though every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run, to flee, to get as far away from this small sleeping human as possible. What they had found behind the mental door was not what any of them had expected. Every sentient species in the galaxy possessed something that the Valori called the Mercy Barrier, an evolutionary safeguard that prevented individuals from committing acts of absolute destruction against their own kind or against other species. It was the voice in every mind that said enough, the internal limit that stopped violence before it became extermination. The psychological wall that made civilization possible across thousands of worlds. Without the Mercy Barrier, intelligent species would destroy themselves before they ever reached the stars. They would hunt their enemies to extinction. They would wage wars without end until nothing remained but ash and silence. The Valori had studied this barrier in hundreds of species, and it was always the same. A permanent fixture of the mind that could be stressed or strained, but never truly broken. But humans were different. Behind the locked door in Elena Vasquez's mind, Thylix had found the place where the human mercy barrier should have been. And what she discovered there had shattered everything she thought she knew about psychology and evolution. The human mercy barrier was not permanent. It was removable. Humans existed in two configurations, two modes of operation that they could switch between depending on circumstances. And the implications of this discovery were so horrifying that several of the scientists had already left the laboratory, unable to face what the data was showing them. In their default mode, humans were social creatures, empathetic and cooperative, capable of great kindness and remarkable compassion. They formed bonds with other species. They created art that celebrated beauty and love. They built societies based on mutual support and shared purpose. But there was another mode, a second configuration that lay dormant behind that locked door, waiting to be activated. When humans decided that an enemy was no longer worthy of mercy, when they concluded that a threat was too great to be tolerated, when they reached the point where their fear transformed into something cold and absolute, they could open that door and become something else entirely. They could become exterminators. Not warriors, not conquerors, not predators. Exterminators. Creatures with no mercy, no hesitation, no internal limits. Beings capable of hunting an enemy to the last individual and erasing them from existence as thoroughly as if they had never lived. "Show me the ancestral memory patterns," Academic Vorath demanded, his voice shaking with fear he could not hide. Thylix adjusted the display, and the screens filled with images drawn from the deepest genetic memories of the human species, echoes of events that had shaped humanity across thousands of generations. The scientists watched in horror as the data revealed what humans had done to their own world before they reached the stars. Tribes that had been erased completely, not just defeated but hunted to the last child until their genetic line ceased to exist. Cities that had been burned so thoroughly that nothing remained but scorched earth and scattered bones. Species that had shared the human planet. Animals that had threatened human survival. Creatures that had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of them driven to extinction with cold and methodical efficiency. And the worst part, the detail that made Thylex's blood freeze in our veins, was that humans remembered every single extinction they had caused. They did not hide from their history or pretend it had not happened. They studied it. They taught it to their children. They built monuments to remind themselves of what they were capable of doing. They were not ignorant of the monster that lived behind the door. They were terrified of it. They built their entire civilization to keep this contained, Mox whispered, his young voice trembling. Their religions, their laws, their social structures, all of it is designed to keep that door closed. But it can still be opened, Vorith said, and his words hung in the air like a death sentence. The data showed the triggers that could unlock the human capacity for extermination, the psychological buttons that would transform cooperative beings into extinction-level threats. Threaten their young, and the door would crack. Attack their homes, and the door would shudder. Give them a reason to believe that their enemy would never stop, would never show mercy, would continue to threaten them until one side or the other was completely destroyed. That was the key that would open the door. That was what would unleash the monster. And once that door was opened, once humans switched into their second mode of operation, there was no going back until the enemy was gone. Not defeated, not conquered, not subjugated. Gone! Erased! Extinct! We have conquered 4,000 worlds, Thylex said quietly. We have broken hundreds of species by exploiting their psychological weaknesses, by pushing them until their mercy barriers strained and they surrendered to avoid the pain. She turned to face her fellow scientists, and her bioluminescent skin had gone completely white with terror. If we had used those techniques on humanity, if we had pushed them the way we push other species, we would not have conquered them. What would have happened? One of the younger scientists asked. They would have decided we were an extinction-level threat, Thylex answered. They would have opened that door, and they would not have stopped until every Valori in the galaxy was dead. Academic Vorith sank into a chair, his old body suddenly looking fragile and weak. They are not predators, he murmured. Predators kill to survive. Predators stop when they are no longer hungry or threatened. They are not conquerors, Thylex continued. Conquerors seek dominion. Conquerors want to rule. They do not want to destroy everything they could control. Then what are they? Mox asked. Thylex looked at the sleeping human in the neural cradle. This small and soft creature that contained something more terrifying than any weapon the Valori had ever encountered. They are a species that can decide something should no longer exist, she said, and then make certain that it does not. They are patient and methodical, and absolutely relentless once the decision is made. They will hunt across generations if necessary, across centuries, across the entire galaxy, if that is what it takes. She paused and let the weight of her words settle over the laboratory. They are the universe's most perfect killers, she concluded, and the only thing protecting the rest of us is their own fear of what they might become. The scientists stared at each other in silence, and for the first time in 12,000 years of Valori history, they began to understand what it meant to be prey. Elena Vasquez opened her eyes slowly, her mind swimming through layers of chemical fog as the sedatives in her system began to wear off. The first thing she noticed was the strange ceiling above her, curved and organic looking, nothing like the metal corridors of her cargo ship. The second thing she noticed was the pain in her head, a dull throbbing ache that told her something had been probing inside her skull. And the third thing she noticed was the silence. She had expected to wake up surrounded by alien scientists poking and prodding her, running tests, asking questions, treating her like the specimen she obviously was. Instead, she found herself alone in what appeared to be a laboratory. The alien researchers pressed against the far walls, as if they were trying to get as far away from her as physically possible. Elena sat up slowly in the strange cradle that held her body, and she watched as several of the aliens flinched at her movement. These creatures were tall and thin, with 6 legs and 4 eyes and skin that glowed with soft colors, and every single one of them looked absolutely terrified of her. These aliens who had captured her ship, who had taken her prisoner, who clearly possessed technology far beyond anything humanity had developed. They were afraid of a single unarmed human female who had just woken up from sedation. "What did you see?" Elena asked, her voice rough and dry from days of unconsciousness. The largest alien, the one with the most elaborate markings on her glowing skin, stepped forward with obvious reluctance, her 4 eyes fixed on Elena with an expression that mixed scientific fascination with primal fear. "You are awake earlier than expected," the alien said. Her words translated through some device that made her voice sound mechanical and flat. "The sedative should have kept you unconscious for several more hours." "I asked what you saw," Elena repeated, and her voice was harder this time, carrying a note of warning that made several of the aliens press even further against the walls. The lead alien, who Elena would later learn was named Thylix, seemed to gather her courage before responding. "We scanned your neural architecture," Thylix admitted. "We have done this to thousands of species across thousands of worlds. It is how we understand those we encounter, how we learn to communicate and cooperate with other civilizations." "That is not what you use it for," Elena said quietly, and she saw the shock ripple across the alien faces in the room. "You use it to find weaknesses, to learn how to break species, to discover what makes them surrender." Thylix's glowing skin flickered with colors that Elena could not interpret. "How do you know this?" the alien asked. "Because it is what I would do if I had your technology and your goals," Elena answered simply. "It is efficient and elegant, and it probably works perfectly on most species you encounter." She swung her legs off the cradle and placed her feet on the floor. And even this simple action caused several aliens to reach for devices on their belts that were probably weapons. "But it will not work on humans, will it?" Elena continued. "Whatever you found inside my head, it scared you badly enough that you stopped treating me like a specimen and started treating me like a bomb that might explode at any moment." Thylix took another step forward, and Elena could see the conflict in her alien features, the desire to understand warring with the instinct to flee. "You know what we found," Thylix said, and it was not a question. "You know what lies behind the locked door in your mind." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with something that might have been sorrow or shame or simply exhaustion. "Yes," she admitted. "Every human knows. We do not talk about it often. We do not like to think about it, but we all know exactly what we are capable of becoming." "Your species is capable of complete extermination," Thylix said, her translator making the words sound clinical and cold. "You can simply decide that something should no longer exist and then ensure that it does not. You have no permanent limits, no unbreakable barriers, nothing that would stop you once you began." "We have limits," Elena replied, and her voice was sharp. "We built them ourselves, our laws, our ethics. Our entire civilization is designed to keep that door closed. We work very hard to remain the people we want to be instead of the monsters we could become." "But you have opened the door before," Thylix pressed. "Your own memories show it. Entire species erased, Entire populations hunted to extinction. You have done this many times throughout your history. Yes, Elena said again, and this time there was no hiding the pain in her voice. We have done terrible things, and we remember every single one of them. We teach our children about the horrors their ancestors committed, so they will understand why the locks must stay in place. She stood up fully and faced Thylix, and even though the alien towered over her, it was clear which of them held the power in this moment. We try not to open the door, Elena said. We really do try. We want to be good and kind and peaceful. We want to explore the universe and make friends and build things that will last forever. She paused, and her eyes grew hard. But if something threatens us badly enough, if something hurts our children or destroys our homes, or makes us believe that mercy will only lead to our own extinction, then the door will open. And then you will not stop, Thylix finished. No, Elena confirmed. We will not stop. We cannot stop once we reach that point. It is not a choice anymore. It becomes who we are until the threat is gone. The laboratory fell silent as the weight of her words settled over everyone present. Finally, Thylix asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the moment they opened the locked door. How do we avoid triggering this response? She asked. How do we ensure that humanity never decides to open that door for us? Elena smiled, and it was a sad smile, the expression of someone who carried a heavy burden that could never be set down. You do not give us a reason, she said simply. You treat us with respect. You do not threaten our homes or our families. You do not make us believe that our survival requires your extinction. And if we do give you a reason? Thylix pressed. Elena's eyes met Thylix's, and for just a moment, the alien caught a glimpse of what lay behind the human's mental door, a flash of something cold and ancient and absolutely merciless. Then you had better make sure you kill every last one of us, Elena answered. Because if even one human survives, if even one of us remains to remember what you did, then the hunt will never end until your species exists only in our history books as another lesson. We teach our children about why the door should stay closed. Thylix understood now why her ancestors had conquered the galaxy without ever encountering a species like this. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not a conquest waiting to happen. Humanity was a sleeping giant that the entire universe should pray never fully awakens. The emergency council chamber of the Valerie High Command had not been used in over 3,000 years. It was a vast circular room buried deep beneath the surface of their homeworld, protected by layers of metal and stone and energy shields that could withstand a direct assault from an enemy fleet. And it had been built in an age when the Valori still feared that something in the universe might threaten their existence. For 3 millennia, they believed that such fears were outdated relics of a primitive past, that their mastery of psychology and their elegant methods of conquest had made them invincible against any species they might encounter. Today, 12 of the most powerful leaders in the collective sat around the ancient table, and every single one of them understood that those 3,000 years of confidence had been built on a lie. They had simply been lucky. They had never encountered humans before. Supreme Commander Corinth studied the data files that Thylix had transmitted from her research vessel, her ancient eyes moving slowly across images and charts that detailed the horrifying architecture of the human mind. Let me understand this correctly, Corinth said, a voice carrying the weight of authority earned across centuries of leadership. This species can remove their own psychological limitations at will. They can become creatures of pure extermination with no mercy and no hesitation. And once they begin, they will not stop until their enemy is completely extinct. That is correct, Supreme Commander, Thylix replied through the communication link, their image flickering on the display screen at the far end of the chamber. And our standard methods of conquest, the psychological manipulation that has broken hundreds of species, would likely trigger this response. Almost certainly, Thylix confirmed. Our methods are designed to create pressure, to make species feel threatened until they surrender. But humans do not surrender when they feel threatened. They fight, and if the threat becomes severe enough, they transform into something that will never stop fighting until the threat is eliminated. Admiral Corvith, the commander of the collective's military forces, leaned forward with an aggressive posture that showed he was not ready to accept this assessment. We have the largest fleet in the galaxy, he declared. We have weapons that can destroy entire planets. We have technology that humans will not develop for thousands of years. Surely, we can simply eliminate them before they become a threat. Thylix's image flickered as she shook her head. You are thinking like a conqueror, Admiral. But humans have already spread to 12 star systems. Their population numbers in the billions, and they reproduce quickly. She pulled up a tactical display that showed the human-occupied region of space. Even if we launched a full assault tomorrow with every ship in our fleet, we could not guarantee the destruction of every human, and if even a small number survive, if even a few thousand escape into the depths of space, they will remember what we did. And then they will come for us. Supreme Commander Corinth finished, understanding dawning in her ancient eyes. Not immediately, Thylix agreed. They might not have the technology to threaten us for centuries, but they will remember. They will teach their children. They will build their entire civilization around the goal of our extinction. She paused to let her words sink in. Humans are patient. They can hold grudges across generations. They have historical records of conflicts that lasted hundreds of years, simply because neither side was willing to forgive past injuries. And those were conflicts between different groups of humans. Imagine what they would do to an alien species that attempted genocide against them. The council chamber fell silent as the leaders of the Valori collective contemplated a future they had never imagined. For 12,000 years, they had been the hunters, the conquerors, the masters of the galaxy who bent other species to their will through superior understanding of the mind. Now they faced a species that could not be bent, could not be broken, could only be destroyed or befriended. And destruction was not a viable option. What do you recommend? Corinth finally asked. Thylix took a deep breath before answering. I have spent the past several days talking with the human prisoner, and she has been remarkably forthcoming about her species. She seems to believe that honesty is the best way to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to conflict. She told me that humans want to be good. They genuinely desire peace and cooperation and friendship with other species. Their default mode is one of empathy and kindness, and they work very hard to maintain that default mode. They fear themselves more than they fear anything else in the universe. Thylix pulled up another display showing the structure of human civilization. If we approach them as friends, if we treat them with respect and honesty, if we offer them technology and assistance without demanding submission in return, they will embrace us as allies. And if we become their allies, she continued, we will be protected by the same terrifying potential that we feared. Because humans protect their friends with the same intensity that they destroy their enemies. Admiral Corvith made a sound of disgust. You are suggesting that the mighty Valori collective should bow down to these primitive creatures, that we should abandon 12,000 years of conquest and become servants to a species that only discovered space travel 2 centuries ago. I am suggesting that we should survive, Thylix replied coldly. I am suggesting that we should recognize when we have encountered something that cannot be conquered through our traditional methods. And I am suggesting that friendship with humanity is far preferable to extinction at their hands. Supreme Commander Corinth raised one of her upper manipulator arms for silence. Enough, she declared. I have heard enough to make my decision. She stood and looked around the table at the assembled leaders of her civilization. 300 years from now, humanity will encounter the Valori Collective. That encounter will happen whether we wish it to or not. And when it happens, we will have two options. We can greet them as conquerors and trigger the response that will destroy us. Or we can greet them as friends and secure an alliance with the most terrifying species the galaxy has ever produced. Her eyes were hard with determination. I choose friendship. I choose survival. I choose to ensure that when humans tell stories about the Valori, they speak of us with warmth and gratitude instead of the cold hatred that precedes extermination. 300 years later, when the formal first contact occurred between humanity and the Valori Collective, the aliens came bearing gifts of advanced technology and offers of eternal alliance. They spoke of humanity's creativity, their art, their compassion, their remarkable ability to find beauty in a hostile universe. And when other species asked why the mighty Valori showed such deference to the small, soft newcomers who had only recently reached the stars, the Valori would smile and change the subject. Some secrets were too terrifying to share. Some doors were better left unopened. And some species were better left unchallenged. Elena Vasquez lived long enough to see that first contact, to watch as the aliens who had once studied her brain knelt before humanity and offered friendship instead of conquest. She smiled as she watched the ceremonies, knowing that the Valori had learned the most important lesson the galaxy would ever teach them. There are some sleeping giants that should never be awakened. And humanity was the greatest sleeping giant of them all.